A prior video, I was describing the Tao Te Ching and the Tao in terms of how it's defined, right? It's the principle underlying reality. It's something that we should just allow to exist. We should embrace its spontaneity. We should embrace that change. The Tao is self-sufficient. It doesn't need anything or anyone to exist. It just exists. And so it also connects to that cyclical nature of reality where everything happens in a cycle and we just kind of need to respect that cycle. Our non-being is connected to our sense of being, just like that nirvana, for example. That sense of nothingness is something that we desire as humans. So we have different ways of existing, we have different ways of being, and the Tao doesn't just favor human beings. It doesn't just apply to human beings. It applies to all life itself, because all life belongs to nature, just like human beings are a part of nature as well. And that's why the Tao is connected to opposites, the yin, the yang. It embodies that kind of opposition, because opposition exists within many of us, and that's okay. They talk about death, which is really interesting because death is inevitable for everyone, but at the same time, we should avoid an unnatural, violent death by not engaging in violent actions. So we should refrain from violence. In chapter 42, they talk about how the violent man dies unnaturally because he has contributed to violence. One also needs to take care of their body and not engage in excessive desires. So while we may feel like we want to drink and eat 2 chocolate shakes, right? Maybe just cut it down, or think about, you know what, maybe I'll have half of one today, and even so I can fulfill that craving a little bit, but I'm not going to completely, let it consume me, and I'm not going to just completely have things that I don't need that are also going to make me unhealthy. So we have to find that balance with physical health and mental health. And we also have to get rid of that egocentric, selfish thinking where we always think me, I. We have to embrace that kind of all-inclusive Tao, that we are connected through this all-inclusive Tao. I think one of the harder parts of Taoism, which is similar to Buddhism, is accepting good luck and bad luck and recognizing, okay, I can't control everything, but embodying a calm acceptance. Everything changes, right? Everything isn't in our control, but we have to kind of embrace it with an open and a non-obsessive attitude, not just kind of hyper focusing on whatever it was bad that happened, but thinking, okay, this happened, but now I can move on, right? I think especially with like a pandemic situation, for example, it's really easy to feel like things are not in our control because they aren't in our control, right? The virus just happens, and it can kill people, and it can make people really sick, and we can't control that. And I think many of us want to kind of hyper focus on it, and it gives us fear and anxiety. But a Taoist response to that could be, well, we can't control that, but we can control the fact that we're at home, that we're social distancing or being physically distant from people. We can control our actions. At least I can cultivate a little bubble of whatever it is I want in my home, even though I can't control what's outside, even though I can't control what's happening in the world. So we shouldn't take what happens in life for granted, right? They talk about not taking fortune or disaster for granted because we just don't really know what can happen. These things occur, and we can't assume that they will always occur a certain way because everything is constantly changing. How do we deal with having desires then, right? If we're supposed to get rid of our egocentric thinking, how do we deal with the fact that we want things that we can't have? And this is where Taoism makes a really interesting distinction between natural desires versus puffed up or projected desires. So natural desires are desires that we all have, and it's okay to fulfill them, such as needing to eat, needing to sleep, feeling thirst, right? Those are things we have to fulfill. And our natural desires are not the desires that we have to worry about. Our natural desires are limited and are modest. It's our puffed up and projected desires that lead us to just go crazy and get lost in the cycle of materialism. So we become obsessed with what we don't need, and the Taoism again critiques language and says that language impacts us. It impacts, and I think also society, right? Language and society working together in that way leads us to not to desire things that we don't need, and to think, oh, you know what, like this person, I don't know, had 1,000 likes on their Instagram photo. Why can't I even get 100 likes or something like that, right? Well, we wouldn't care about this if we weren't obsessing over something that was socially constructed, like an Instagram photo, right? These things don't actually matter in the grand scheme of things, but we become so obsessed with them because they matter in this curated world that we live in. So in chapter 7 through 13, they really capture this idea of getting rid of egocentric thinking and refraining from acting out of self-interest, thinking about how our actions impact other people again, and how our actions impact the Tao or the way. And they give the example in these chapters 7 and 13 of how if someone has a lot of money, like them having a lot of money or them hoarding money is unethical because there are people who don't have a lot of money. So that's an example of kind of a political or social implication of Taoism, not being selfish, not hoarding things, not being greedy and having what you don't need to have, right? Not living based off of your projected desires. Now, what kind of society would this philosophy or religion take shape in? Basically, kind of a smaller society, a simple life, right? More of kind of a rural situation where everyone has their natural share, and rulers have to follow the Tao as well. They're not exempt from having to follow the path or the way, because the path or the way just exists, and it's a way of preventing rulers and people from becoming arrogant. So that is basically Taoism in a nutshell. With respect to how it's this guiding principle, it's a path, it's the way, and then in order to embrace this path, we have to follow non-action, not projecting false ideas, not forcing our will into things, having a calm acceptance for that which we cannot control, which is really hard, and not being selfish. Again, lots of similarities and connections to Buddhism, but I think this goes in a direction of even more of a fluid, open philosophy than Buddhism. And then pretty much all of the religions we're looking at and studying.